I am standing in need of prayer tonight, so can we begin with a little prayer? In the early Christians prayed, we know this from the catacomb walls. In the Hebrew tradition out of which we come, you always changed your posture when you prayed. Okay? That's why, you bow our heads, or we still continue this today, fold our hands, or whatever. But the early Christians had a unique gesture. When they prayed like this. Now today, in our language, this is a stick-up. You know those Westerns? Anybody see these Westerns, stick 'em up? Which really means, but the original meaning of this was kind of, I surrender. I surrender. Can you surrender tonight? There we go. So let's pray. Fill thou my life, O Lord our God, in every part with praise, that my whole being may proclaim your being and your ways. Fill every part of me with praise. Let my whole being speak of thee and of thy love, O God, poor though I be and weak. Shall thou, God, from me, even me, receive the glory due. And so might we all begin on earth the song forever new. And all God's people said, amen. It's your breath in our what? Lungs. So we pour forth our praise. We pour forth our praise. Now let's get this right. It's whose breath? God's breath in our. It takes the divine to be human. Now that sounds kind of simple, but there's few things I can say more profound than that. In order for you to be fully human, you need the divine. It's not just any breath. See, animals get breath. But God created humans a little lower than, now we all say the angels, but that's not the translation. The Hebrew is Elohim. God created humans a little lower than God. The angels are nowhere in comparison to the capstone of creation, which is human. But in order to be human, and this is why we are the capstone of creation, you need the divine. Now, that does not mean that we ought to aspire to be divine. That's an original sin. That's pride. That's, you can be like God. No. But for us to be fully, wholly, purely, passionately human, we need the divine. We need God's breath. And this brings us to tonight. This is the third in our series based on the great commission that Jesus gave us, which is our true mission statement. And it has three parts, and you remember them by MRI, right? M stands for missional, R stands for, and I tonight stands for incarnational. Now, what in the world is this, and what does that incarnation mean, and what's the meaning of that word? Before I came here, I've been holed up for home for about 3 months, just being there. And before, I flew here from Atlanta, but I arranged that I would speak at a little college outside of Atlanta before I came to you all, called Emmanuel College. And I love that name, Emmanuel, right? Emmanuel. Anybody know what Emmanuel means? The word Emmanuel? Yeah, you all know. God with us. God, what? So God has a middle name. God's middle name is with. The ultimate witness in the world is your witness. As God was with us in Jesus, God's witness, and as we are called to be in the world as God's witnesses. I can't say it enough. Your ultimate witness is your witness. And that's really the essence of what it means to be incarnate, to become in the flesh, incarnate. It means to be with someone as God was with us. And the incarnation really begins with creation as God's first, as God, there's something of God that needs to reveal who God is and become with the world. And so God begins that process of incarnation with creation as God creates all that there is. And then finally, the ultimate is the witness in Jesus, God's only Son, Emmanuel, the God with us. And so tonight we talk about the meaning of what it means to be with and the ultimate witness, who is Jesus. You and I need to get through life some witnesses. We need some people in our lives who are witnesses, and we need to be for others witnesses. Now let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Every one of you here needs a Barnabas. Now, who is Barnabas? Well, Barnabas in the Bible was somebody who's known for being an encourager, right? So somebody who was constantly, wherever he met, he would encourage people. He encouraged the disciples. That's what he was famous for, was encouraging the apostles. And so he was an encourager. You all need in your life a Barnabas. Now think right now, in your life, do you have a Barnabas? Who is that person in your life? You might call him a balcony person who's cheerleading you and supporting you and encouraging you, and you can do this. And who are you a Barnabas for? Who are you with? Who are you incarnate for them? Jesus, witness, and balconing their life and being a balcony. We got enough basement people. Anybody know what I'm talking about? We need some balcony people. And the witness of a Barnabas. We all need a Barnabas. And we all need to be, for somebody else, a Barnabas. Who's your Barnabas? Let me tell you another witness we need. We need a Nathan. We need a Nathan. Now, I had one of my students at Drew University a few years ago. She was telling me some problems that she was having. And so I said, sister, you know what you need in your life? You need a Nathan. She said, I need a what? I said, you need a Nathan. I stuck a bony finger in her face just to kind of animate my point, You need a Nathan. She said, I need a Nathan? Yeah, you need a Nathan. She says, I need a hot dog. The only Nathan she could think of was Nathan's hot dogs. I go, no, Nathan, who, remember Nathan and David? We somehow miss our own story. We don't know our own story. No, you need somebody in your life that's going to stick a bony finger in your face and say, you the one that is really messed up, you the one that's really blown it, but you the one that God's called to do great things. So we need that, and I call this person not an accountability partner. Frankly, I don't like that, If somebody comes to you and says, I'm called to be your accountability partner, run the other way, okay? Because actually Paul says love does not keep a score. Love takes no account of wrong. So, no, I'm talking about somebody. Now, I write all the time, and my publisher gives me somebody called an editor. Now, these are interesting people. And the best editor, though, when you get back from the editor, what they've done to your manuscript, it is full of blood. There is red ink everywhere. I mean, you're looking at this and your heart just breaks because you realize, was it really this bad? Because it's a bloody mess what they've done to your manuscript. But you realize, no, what they're doing is they're investing in your life because they want to make your voice better. These are people that care enough about what you've written and care enough about you that they're willing to spend all this time. Of course, they're getting paid for it. That's another issue. But they're willing to spend all this time making and platforming your voice so it can be as strong as it possibly can. And all of us need in our lives, the story of our lives needs an editor. We all need an editor. Now, the author of our story ought to be, well, see, your author is your authority. So whoever is authoring your life is the authority of your life. And so I want the author of my life story to be Jesus, because he is my authority. A lot of people want to author their own lives, or they want some celebrity to author their lives, or some brand to author their lives. No. There's only one person worthy of being my author, and that is Jesus, who is my authority. But as he authors my life needs a Nathan, an editor. So each of us needs the witness of a Nathan. So who's your Nathan? Who is your editor? It's going to change over time, but right now, who's helping to edit your story, your life story? And who are you being a Nathan to, that you care enough about their story and care enough about their platforming their story that you're going to invest in them and spend all that time helping to make their story better and more coherent and cogent and compelling. So we need the witness of a Nathan. But let me tell you, we also need a Bethany. The witness of a Bethany. You're going to say, what in the world are you talking about? Bethany was about 2 miles from Jerusalem. Some of you may have actually been to Bethany. Anybody here been to Bethany? Okay, some of you have, yeah. So you know it's not that far. And it was close enough so that Jesus could just kind of scoot over there real quick and kind of hide out. And that's what he did. He hid out and kind of camped out for a while at Bethany. It was God's favorite place on earth. It was Jesus' favorite place to hang. And he needed that Bethany. Now one of the reasons why he needed that Bethany, Jesus cried twice that we know of. Now, we know he probably cried a lot more than that, but we know he cried twice. Once he cried over a place, and the place was named Jerusalem. Do you care enough about your place to cry over it? Jesus loved the city enough to cry over it. Do you love your city enough to cry over it? But he also loved, not just he cried over a place, he also cried over a person. The person's name was Lazarus. Who was Lazarus? His best friend. Now, first of all, Jesus had a best friend. This is huge. 61% of U.S. clergy say they have no best friend. 61% have no best friend. What, are you better than Jesus? Even Jesus needed a best friend. And so you all need the witness of a Lazarus. But Lazarus didn't come by himself. Okay? Lazarus, whose home was where? In Bethany, but he came with 2 others. So Jesus had an ensemble of best friends that he would hang with. And he loved to hang at Bethany because he could hang out with Lazarus, and then who else was there? Mary and Martha. These were his best friends. Now notice his best friends were not part of the 12. Think about that. Jesus did not have a best friend in the 12. And there's a reason for that, because the 12 will betray you. Your inner circle, it's not just one disciple betrayed Jesus, they all betrayed Jesus. All of them did. Like he said, you fail to praise me and the rocks will cry out. And they failed to praise him. They went in hiding and the rocks cried out. The rocks were more faithful to Jesus on the cross than his own disciples who were out in hiding. So we need some best friends, but we need best friends that are outside of our most intimate working circle, because Jesus needed a place where he could just escape from his team of 12, a team of who liked one another? No. Jesus put on his team the extremes of the Jewish community of his day. There were the zealots. They were the extreme. Zealots killed Roman oppressors, and they were out to take down Roman Jewish collaborators with those Roman oppressors. And what's the number one Jewish collaborator? A tax collector. So Jesus put on his team Simon the zealot and Matthew the tax collector. Can you imagine those meetings? So Jesus needed a place to escape from this. He needed a place to get away and just plop down in a chair and go, you would not believe what Peter did this week. If James and John don't stop fighting with one another, I'm going to be on my right and who's going to be on my left? And I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm terrified. He needed a place where he could just be himself. And that's what he found in Bethany, his witness. A place that was his witness, where he could just be with them. Now, he said he chose his disciples because he wanted to be with them, but you even need sometimes to escape those you're called most to be with. And so he had that escape in Bethany. Now, the incredible story, and this is the story that I want us to look at tonight very quickly. And this is my first semester of seminary, and it came Christmas time, and I had to submit my first sermon. So this is the first sermon I ever wrote, and I have repented of this sermon so many times. I've removed it from any evidence that it ever existed, at least I've tried to. And I am so embarrassed and repentant that I ever wrote this sermon. And the sermon was called, it was a Christmas sermon because that's when it was due. Will it be a Martha or a Merry Christmas? And I spent the whole sermon that I submitted. Of course, they loved it, but I'm now realizing it should have gotten an F. Trashing who? Martha. I spent the whole sermon trashing Martha. Well, that's really smart, because who runs the church? It's not your Marys. It's your Marthas. It's your Marthas that are the ones that, one of the most important ministers you can have. Every church, who's your minister of food? Because another reason why Jesus hung out at Bethany is that he loved what? Martha's cooking. It's not Mary's cooking. Mary probably couldn't cook. She had other things that Jesus liked, the intellectual engagement, but Jesus is a foodie. You all know that, right? Everywhere you got to have food if Jesus is around. He said John came, fasting, but I came feasting. And so he's Revelation 3:20, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone will open it, I will enter. But you better have some food. I will enter and eat with you. Jesus, every time Jesus teaches around a table, he doesn't teach up in a platform or in a lectern. He teaches around the table where there's food. And by the way, every time Jesus hosts a table and there's food involved, there are leftovers. So it's not just enough for people at the table. We need a theology of leftovers. What do we do with all this leftover food? Or do we just keep it ourselves, take it home and hoard it, and build bigger barns? Or do we share with the world? And so Jesus he loves Martha. He's being pulled back because this is my second question when I get to heaven. My first question is, Jesus, why sleep? Why is sleep not a design defect? Okay? You give us such a short time to begin with, and we spend a third of it dead. We're going to be dead long enough. Why do we have to be dead while we're alive? Sleep just seems like It's a bad idea. Okay? So I'm going to ask why sleep. My second question is going to be, what was your favorite Martha dish? What kept you coming back to Bethany? And can I have a taste of your favorite Martha dish? So you know that Jesus is there because he loves Martha's cooking. And so here we have the story. Let's read it. Jesus' disciples were on their way. He came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. Now here's the key. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Now, this is a funny way of translating the Greek here. The Greek really is, Martha has a hissy fit. Now, that's the best translation of the Greek. I'm sorry. Martha's having a hissy fit. She's anxious about all that's going on and anxious about feeding Jesus. And she comes to him and says, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. And Jesus goes, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Or indeed, only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. Now, we read this, and this is what I did in my sermon. I spent the whole sermon showing how Jesus condemned Martha. If you read this carefully and understand the context, Jesus is not condemning Martha, he's correcting her. Now, hear the difference. He's not condemning her. And we got to be very careful we don't condemn our Marthas. Thank God for our Marthas. Because they're the ones that keep the church going, and they've got the servant's heart, and they're the ones that are feeding us. Well, you have a Martha here. Elsie, is that? And Maria, we met her. So you got these people are some of your most important ministers. Don't call them a director of food. They are ministers of food. All right? It's a ministry. The Martha ministry is a huge ministry. But let's be clear. Jesus is there because he loves Martha's cooking. But for some reason, Martha is stressed out. She's upset. She's anxious. She's troubled. And so Jesus responds to her in a unique way that we fail to appreciate because we're not reading the story right. I had a grandma who was a Martha. My grandma, when I visited her, the first thing she would do is what? Sit me down at the table. And she'd start what? Putting on my plate what? Food. The food that she had made, my grandma's food. I still can taste and smell my grandma's food. Anybody have a grandma like that? You know what I'm talking about? Okay. Did she ever sit down with me? No. She's hovering over me, watching as I eat this. Do you like this? How is this? And as soon as I finished her food, what does she do? She plopped down more on it, you know. And so you're having to deal with 2, 3 plates of grandma's food, and she's just hovering over you, talking to you, because she has a servant's heart. She loves to serve, and she loves to. This is what brings her pleasure. What brings her pleasure in me is serving me her food, and she knows how much I love it. So there's reciprocity and mutuality because she's serving and loving to serve. And Jesus sees this, and for some reason, Martha's not loving to serve. It's not pleasure for her. It's not a blessing for her. She's troubled about it and upset about it. And Jesus is saying to Martha, Martha, I thought you loved serving me and serving me your food, and I certainly love receiving your food and eating your food. But Martha, don't you understand? Hear this. You're more important to me than your food. Look at Mary. She doesn't care a whit about whether I'm eating or not. She has no concern about my food because what brings her pleasure is talking to me and conversing with me. I love that this morning when I heard coffee stations, I heard conversations. And it's all about the conversation with Mary. But that's how she serves. That's what brings her pleasure. And I thought what brought you pleasure was serving me. But Martha, don't you understand? The servant is more important to me than the service. And all your Marthas, and some of you who are Marthas need to hear this. You. And your relationship with Christ is more important than all that you're doing for Jesus. It's all about that relationship. And Jesus is correcting Martha and telling her, Martha, I'd rather starve, I'd rather not eat, than for you to be stressed out and upset about feeding me. Don't worry about my food. Look at Mary, she's not worried about my food. Don't you worry about it either. I love you, Martha. I love you not for what you do for me, but for who you are. The servant is more important than their service. And this was Jesus' witness of Bethany and his friends that he found in this place. The witness of a best friend, the witness of a place, a safe place for you to go hide and just be yourself, where you know it's not going to be used against you. A safe place for you to vent and just say, what a week I've had. You would not believe what Peter did. This is the incarnation, God in the flesh, who wants to be with us in ways in which we can only imagine in our deepest yearnings. This is incarnate, God in the flesh, God one of us. So I challenge you as you live out this MRI faith, this missional, relational, incarnational faith, that everything that you do it as out of a missional mindset. You do it realizing the most important thing is that relationship with Christ, and you do it out of the sense that I am to be here in this place, incarnate, Jesus in the flesh, with the world out there. Now that is why, and I'm going to close with this tonight, that is why I really believe that we need a new word in English for transform. If I am incarnating the gospel in Chinese culture, and I go to China, and I say, hi, Chinese, I'm here with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we're going to transform your culture. Do y'all hear that? See, there's an element of colonialism in there, because ultimately, when I say I'm going to transform something, first of all, it's outside in, and it's going to end up looking like me. It's always going to look like ending like me. And this is what has happened too often in the history of missions. As we've tried to incarnate the gospel in other cultures, it ends up looking very Western. And so I really believe that the word that we ought to start thinking about is not the word transform, but the word transfigure. Because that word transfigure, and we just had a Transfiguration Sunday, is not an outside-in change, but an inside-out change. It's a change in our lives as Jesus is incarnated in each one of us, and Jesus wants to be incarnated in you and in me. But it's a change that is the kind of change that turns a caterpillar into a butterfly. It's a metamorphosis. And this is the word metanoia in Greek, means an about face, a change of consciousness, a change of identity. And this is the ultimate change as Jesus takes form and fashion in us, and we go from living creepy, crawly lives into soaring in faith in the winds of God's Spirit. So it's a transfiguration that Jesus promises to be incarnated in us, not a transformation, an inside-out change where we become new creatures in Christ. And that's why the power of this metaphor of the wind, which we began with, as God wants to breathe God's breath. And remember, Jesus didn't baptize anybody himself, but he said, when I baptize with the Spirit. And this is the wind of God's Spirit that breathes into each one of us and makes us fully human, but you can't be fully human without the breath. And you remember the first thing Jesus does after his resurrection? He goes to the upper room with his disciples and he appears to them, and then he does what with them? He breathes on them. And then that's a preliminary breathing that brings resurrection power and purpose and all of them. But then there's the big breathing that makes us real human, which is the breathing that comes at, what's the day? Pentecost. When it's not just a breath, it's a gale of a breath, as God breathes on the assembled disciples and all those gathered. And this is why we celebrate the birthday of the church. It's Pentecost, when we become now fully human, empowered by the breath of God's Spirit to go out there and be with the world. The fundamental heresy of the church is the notion that it's the trees that move the wind. The fundamental heresy of our world is the notion that it's the trees that move the wind. It's the notion that the most powerful forces in the universe are material, they're physical, they're financial, they're political forces. No. The power is not in the tree. The most powerful forces in this universe are the unseen, invisible. Not by might, not by power, but it's by, what's the rest of it? But see, we rewrite that. It is by programs. You got to get the right program. No. It's not by might, it's not by power, it's not by program. Now, my tribe is, just trust the process. No, it's not by might, it's not by power, it's not by programs, it's not by processes, but it's by God's Spirit. The breath. There's nothing more powerful than the breath, because that's what makes us fully human, and Jesus said, when you're fully human and living out of that baptism of the wind, the power of the Spirit, greater things will you be able to do than I ever did. Have you really encompassed the meaning of that? Greater things? To be fully human, empowered by the divine breath, means even greater things will we be able to do. And the trees acknowledge the supremacy of the wind, because when the wind blows, what do the trees do? They bow. They bend. They honor the supremacy of the wind. The power of the wind. To breathe resurrection, fuel and food, faith and fervor in every one of us. So I send you out into the world as MRI disciples, missional, relational, incarnational. I anoint this church as an MRI church, missional, relational, incarnational. But understand the power of that MRI DNA. The power is not in the physical material. The power is in the invisible that empowers the physical. In carne, the in is the breath. The carne is the flesh. But it's got to have the breath. The Word became flesh. Spirit became matter. But it all starts with spirit. Spirit matters. The power is in the Spirit. And that breath, God's breath, the divine breath, is what makes us who God made us to be. Fully whole human beings.